Since I'm working with jobs, I will change my role center. I will go to My Settings. And under Role, I will change it to Project Manager. You can of course have other role centers and still be working with jobs, but the Project Manager role center gives a good overview of your jobs if that's your primary work area. I will say OK. Now I've changed my role center and I'm ready to start working with my jobs. The role center gives me a good overview of invoicing, work in process, jobs to budget, my tasks. I can also see a list of my jobs. This means jobs where I'm the project manager. There's also some relevant diagrams at the bottom of my role center. In my daily work as a consultant, I often find that people have a hard time understanding the hierarchy of jobs. It's actually quite simple when you put it up like this in a model, but of course you need the overview as well when you're working in the system. I often say that if you understand this structure, this hierarchy, then you're a long way. The hierarchy is divided into 3 levels. At the top level, we have the job itself. You can view that as the project. The job can then be divided on the second level into different tasks that we need to perform. And on the third level, we divide into planning lines and job ledger entries, showing the expected and the realized. This structure gives us a powerful tool to follow up on projects, their different phases, and what we are expecting and what we have actually realized so far. So let's have a look in the system. So let's see the structure on actual data. I will go to my list of jobs. It's easy accessible here from my Project Manager role center. Here I have my list of jobs. So that's the top level, the level 1. I will open one of the jobs. And here in the middle, we have the job tasks. So that's the second level. If I want to see my planning lines, I'll go to Navigate, Job Planning Lines. So now we're on the third level. I can also view my job ledger entries. And here we can see that a resource has spent some time working on this project.
If you wish to create a job in Business Central, there are several ways to do this. Since I have the Project Manager role center, I have the action New, Job. I also have a link to the jobs list. This will take me to the list of jobs, and from there I can press New. If you do not have this role center, you can use the search function. I will type in Jobs and choose the relevant link. From the jobs list, I can click on New. If you have set up number series in the job setup, the system will automatically assign a new number. And then you need to enter a description. So here we will give sales support to a customer. When you choose the customer, the system will populate all relevant fields with information from the customer card. I will add myself as project manager. This way, the new job will be shown in the list of my jobs on my role center. And just to make sure, I will go to the Postings tab. The job posting group and web method have already been added, and this is because the new job has inherited my default settings from the job setup. I can change, for example, the WIP method for this specific job. This will not change the default setup for jobs. It only relates to this specific job. I also need to add a job task. I will add a number and a description. I will keep the job task type posting. This is the type of lines where we can post entries to. Now we have created a job. And just to make sure, we will go back to the role center and see that the job has now been added to the list of my jobs. Job planning lines are at the third level of the job hierarchy. We use the job planning lines to register our expectations for the job. It is also the job planning lines we use as foundation for creating sales invoices based on our job. The job planning lines can be of type both budget and billable, budget and billable. We use both budget and billable if our expected usage and expected sales are equal. So, for example, time and material. We use budget to register our expected usage. It is also the billable lines which are transferred to our sales invoice. For example, if we have agreed on a fixed price. If we go to a job card in the application, we can add planning lines. We can add them via actions, or we can choose a specific job task of type posting. Since I opened the planning lines from a job task, it will automatically inherit the job task number. Now I can start defining my job planning lines. I need to consider the line type. As mentioned, we have the type budget, billable, or both budget and billable if we are using time and material. If I create a type budget, this is my expected usage. If I create a type billable, this is expected sales, and this is also what will be billed to the customer. And for the both budget and billable, the budgeted and billable lines are equal to each other. So, for example, the type budget, so our expected usage, can be used if we have some activities that we do not wish to bill directly to the customer. This could be preparation time before the planning workshop. Since the type is resource, we can choose a specific resource for the planned usage. So I might choose John and expect 2 hours for that. As you can see, the unit cost and the unit price have been populated. This information is taken from the specific setup on the job, and if we have not made any on the job, it comes from the standard setting on the resource. Once I've entered quantity, the total cost and total line amount are updated. If we have agreed a fixed price for this workshop, we might bill that to the customer. I can choose to handle this on another type. For example, if I wish to post it directly to a GL account, and I can choose an account. If both the expected usage and sales are equal to each other, for example, the actual preparation, I can enter a line of the type both budget and billable. In this case, we might have agreed that John is doing all the work in the preparation in the planning workshop. And we might have said that it's a day's work. So now we have created 3 planning lines. If I go back to the job card, we can see that the job task planning workshop now have updated numbers for budget and billable. We can click on the field and see the underlying records. So this is our budget for total cost. So we have lines of type budget and type both budget and billable, and the sum of total cost. We also have the total billable price. And here we have job planning lines of type billable or both budget and billable. And here we focus on the total line amount. Once we start posting entries to the job, the actual total cost and actually invoice numbers will appear in these lists.
So here we will have a look at the invoicing process from an overview perspective. As you know from the hierarchy, we have the job planning lines, and we have three types, both budget and billable, budget and billable. And when we're talking invoicing, we're focused on the both budget and billable lines and the billable lines, because those are the ones that will be transferred to the invoice. So basically, we want to register some usage, for example, resources who are doing a time registration, and some cost from a purchase invoice perhaps. They go into our project module, and from there we want to create a sales invoice to our customers. So from a planning line perspective, we have budget, which maybe or maybe not will be the same as our billable side, going to the customer. Our job ledger entries focus on usage entries and sales entries, which will be created when we post a sales invoice. Try and keep this division in mind when we look at the next slide. So here I'm back at the job hierarchy. We have our job task, and then our job planning lines. Based on our job planning lines, we can create a sales invoice. When we create it at first, it will be a draft invoice, but when we post it, several different ledger entries can be created based on this invoice. So on the job, we will create new job ledger entries of the type sales. And of course, we will be able to see that this invoice is linked to our job. But there are, of course, a lot of other entries created since we're working in an ERP system. We will, of course, create customer ledger entries on the customer which was set up for the job. We will create general ledger entries based on our posting setups. And depending on whether we're selling items or resources, item ledger entries and resource ledger entries can also be created. So one click when you post the invoice will generate a lot of data in your system. Okay, let's have a look at the cost side of our jobs hierarchy model. So here we have the three levels, the job tasks, and then the job ledger entries. When we're talking costs going into the job, we're talking job ledger entries of the type usage. They might be converted into a sale. That would require that our usage registered on the job is created as a job planning line, which is billable or both budget and billable. And that's the other side of level 3 in the model. For now, just think of the usage box here. So the intention is that we might have a purchase invoice from a vendor, and we want to register that in our project or our job, and maybe or maybe not convert it into a sales invoice. And based on our price setup on the job, we might add an extra markup or give a discount. But this would be the flow into the project from the purchase invoice, and then any costs created as a billable job planning line can be converted into a sales invoice line. And remember, the type budget will not be created on your sales invoice, only those of type billable. The main focus here is usage. Then we want to post the usage to our job. And as I said, we can convert that into a sale as well. Let's have a look at the entries which are created based on a purchase invoice. So when we post a purchase invoice, of course, it will create job ledger entries of the type usage. But since we're in an ERP system, the posted purchase invoice will also create vendor ledger entries on the relevant vendor, GL entries based on our posting setups, and based on what we've entered on the purchase invoice, item ledger entries, and resource ledger entries. And as I mentioned, depending on how you handle your job, can be invoiced to the jobs customer. Now we will look at the top level of our job hierarchy. And that's the job, or you can think of it as the main project. The job is the primary entity in Business Central. From my role center, I will go to the list of jobs. This list is similar to the list of customers, vendors, items, and so on. Here I have the full overview of all jobs created in my system. If I click on a specific one, I get a more detailed overview, including the lower levels of my hierarchy.
If I wish to save time in the process of creating jobs, I can use the assisted setup. I go to Actions, New, and choose Job. The system will now ask if you wish to create it from an existing job. If you choose No, then the system will create a job, but you need to fill in everything manually. If you choose Yes and Next, the system will automatically assign my new job a number because I have set up number series in the job setup. I need to add a description and a customer. And then click Next. Then I'm transferred to a page based on the normal copy job function. In the copy from, I need to choose which job to copy from. I can see that my new job is already created in the list, and I can choose to copy from another one. I can enter a range of job task numbers in the From and To fields. If I leave them blank, the system will copy all job tasks. The copy to is of course my new job number, and then I can choose if I wish to copy quantities and dimensions from the old job. And then click OK. We are informed that the job was successfully copied and say OK. And that's it. Now we have created a new job. The copy function has copied the job task number from the other job and the description and customer we entered. Based on the customer we chose, the system will populate all relevant information from the customer card. Job planning lines are at the third level of the job hierarchy. If we go to the application, in the application I have opened the job card. In order to save time, I can choose to copy job planning lines instead of creating them manually. I can do this by choosing the line to which I wish to copy the planning lines. I will choose this one and choose the copy. I can copy job planning lines from a job to this one, or I can copy the lines from this one to another job. I will choose to copy from. I will just copy from the same job number. And the job task 3000. In the Include Planning Line Types field, I can choose which types I wish to copy. If I choose Budget and Billable, all planning lines are copied. If I choose Budget, all planning lines of type Budget or Budget and Billable are copied. If I choose the type Billable, lines of type Billable or Budget and Billable are copied. I will copy both types. I can enter a date filter. I will leave it blank to copy all. Under Copy To, the system has already filled out the job number to copy to and the task line, which was the one I marked when I entered the copy function. Under Apply, we can choose if we wish to copy the quantity. We can choose to do that. And now the lines were successfully copied. And as you can see, the lines are now equal to each other, and the underlying planning lines with these two resources are the same. So we have both budgeted and we will bill 2 hours for Simon and John on both job tasks.
Before you start using the Jobs module, it's a good idea to define the job setup. The job setup allows you to set up a number of default settings for a job. I will go to the job setup. As you can see, there are not that many fields to set up in the job setup, but I will go through them anyway. It's good to look at this setup before you start using the module because it might save you some time. For example, for the default work in process method and how they should be calculated, default posting groups and so on. Most of these setups can be changed on the individual jobs. So only set up these if you want them to be inherited across all new jobs. If you have some main groups of jobs that need different setups, for example, for WIP method or the job posting groups, I would recommend that you instead create some different template jobs that you can copy in the jobs list. And there's a separate video on how to copy a job. Okay, so let's look at the fields. This one, automatic update job item cost. By marking this field, you can ensure the cost changes are automatically adjusted to the job entries each time you run the adjust cost item entries batch job. That's a long name, but the main point is that this way you can ensure the costs on items are updated on your job, so they will match the actual cost on the item ledger entry. The adjustment process and the results are the same as when you run the update job item cost batch job, but this is just to ensure that it's also updated if you run the adjust cost item entries batch job. So if you're not using items on your jobs, then this is not relevant. The apply usage link by default specifies whether job ledger entries by default should be created with a link to the job planning lines. And in more normal terms, it means that the usage on the job by default will be linked to a job planning line. So in the jobs hierarchy, this is the usage link, so where we are linking job ledger entries to job planning lines. In the next one, you need to consider if you want to allow the type of planning lines called budget billable. So if you allow this, you will have the option to have budget lines, billable lines, and the one called budget and billable. So in the model, we're talking about both budget and billable this time, if you want to allow this one. Then there's some different setups regarding working process. You can define the default WIP method. Here I have 5 different standard ones to choose from. I will just choose percentage of completion. I can also define the default WIP posting method, if it should be per job or per job ledger entry. I can also set up the default job posting group. Here I have 1 to choose from. You might have more than 1. And that's just those created in the job posting setup. I can also choose where I want logos to be positioned on documents. I will just choose no logo. And then we can look at the bottom here with the numbering. I can define the job numbers, and I've created a number series for jobs. I've also created one for job WIP and one for job price lists. Now I've set up my job setup. Oops, I forgot. I didn't choose the standard one. Now I've made the full setup. If I want to create a sales invoice for one specific job, I can do it from the jobs list. So in the jobs list, I'll go to process, create job sales invoice, and it will open the job create sales invoice batch job. You can also use the search to find this one. Since I want to invoice one whole job, I need to set a filter. And since I want to invoice the whole job, I will say create invoice per job. I could also do it per job task, but the focus here is the whole job. And I also want to invoice all job task numbers, so I'll leave this one blank. In my example here, I will not add a date filter either. I will just leave that one blank as well. So, one invoice created, and let's have a look. So we can see that on this job, we already have a posted invoice, and now we've created a new draft invoice with everything there was to invoice on that specific job. On the second level of the hierarchy, we divide the job into multiple job tasks. You can think of these as the phases of a project, and they provide the data structure for all transactions on the job. You can also think of this as a simple chart of account for each job, and we actually have some functionality similar to the chart of accounts when it comes to defining the job tasks. Be aware that job task lines are mandatory when it comes to creating a job, as you cannot post entries on the job without at least one job task to refer to. So let's go into the system and have a look. I will go to the list of jobs and just open one of them. Now I will go from the top level on the jobs. In this example, I've divided my job into 8 job tasks. You can see them down here. This looks like a more waterfall-based project method, but it's up to you to define how you want these job tasks to be structured. And just a word of advice, you need at least one job task of the type posting. But as I mentioned, it's similar to the chart of accounts where you can have different types. So like the chart of account, you can create headings, totals, begin totals, and end totals. This is mainly used on more complex jobs, but that's of course up to you. But as I said, you need at least one of the type posting in order to post entries to your job.
In a lot of cases, the job will contain the same setup as other jobs. In these cases, we can use the copy jobs function. Since I'm using the Project Manager Role Center, I have access to the jobs list via the Role Center. Here or here. I can also use the search function. In the jobs list, I can choose the job I wish to copy. This one, for example. And then choose the copy jobs function. The system will automatically assign the job I marked in the list as the copy from job, but it is possible to change the job here. It might be useful to create a template job. This way, you always have the same basic setup for all new jobs. Or you can create a range of templates if you have different types of basic jobs. In the Copy From tab, we have different options. Apart from the job number, we can decide a range of job task numbers to copy. If we leave the From and To fields blank, the system will copy all job task numbers. The Source field specifies the basis on which you wish to create planning lines on the new job. The system will propose the existing job planning lines, but you can also choose to base the new planning lines on job ledger entries or none. If you choose job planning lines, you can decide which type of planning lines you wish to copy. If you choose budget and billable, the system will copy lines of type both budget and billable, budget and billable. If you choose budget, the system will copy lines of type budget and billable. If you choose billable, only lines of type billable or type both budget and billable are copied. If I instead choose the source job ledger entries, the include planning line type is grayed out, and instead I can choose which ledger entry type to copy. If I choose usage plus sales, all job ledger entries are copied. Entries of type usage are copied to new planning lines of type budget. Entries of type sale are copied to new planning lines of type billable. If I choose only usage, new planning lines of type budget will be created. If I choose sale, new planning lines of type billable will be created. I can add a date filter for start date and ending date. In the Copy To Fast tab, we need to define the new job. I will leave the job number field blank since I have defined number series in the job setup. The system has proposed the original customer on my Copy From job, but I can change it to another customer and change my description as well. In the Apply tab, I can choose if I wish to copy prices, quantities, or dimensions from a job. And then I can say OK. Since I left the job number blank, the system informs me which job number the new job will get. Say yes. And my job was successfully copied. And as we can see in the list, my new job has been created. If I open the job card, we can see that job tasks have been copied and the setup has been copied. Because I chose another customer, the information from this customer will be taken from the customer card. The system has also copied the person responsible and the project manager.
I usually say that if you understand posting setups, then you understand one of the most fundamental parts of the system, because they're a very important part of the underlying structure. And there's a lot of videos on posting setup, so if you're in doubt about the concept or the basic premises for this, then I recommend that you search for those. Let's have a look at the job posting group. As you can see here, I have only one job posting group called Standard. And if you have a simple setup, one posting group can be enough. But I usually recommend, especially if you're using different working process methods, that you have one posting group per WIP method. And of course, if you need to split things in another way, then you can create as many as you want. Basically, job posting groups, they define the relationship between your job and the general ledger. So the whole basic setup here are account numbers from the chart of accounts stating where the system should post work in process cost amounts or where it should post item costs and the sales. So the job posting group enabled the system to know where to post usage and sales and work in process transactions, so you don't have to consider those postings. You need at least one job posting group in order to start using your job module. If you're in doubt of the meaning of any of these fields, watch the more advanced video. You can define a default job posting group in the job setup, which will be inherited to all new jobs. And if we go to the job card, you can see that the job posting group here is filled out with the value standard because it was set up as my default in the job setup. I'm able to change this posting group, but since I only have one option in my system, it doesn't make sense right here. But of course, if you have different ones and you have set up a default, you might want to change it if it doesn't apply to that specific job. You can even add it on your job task level. Here I've added the field job posting group. It might not be visible to you right now, but then you can add the field as a personalization. It could be relevant to have different job posting groups if you're using different working process methods. And these can also be individual per job task. And then, of course, the job posting group should follow that. If I want to create sales invoices per job task for a job, I can also do that. I will go to Process, Create Job Sales Invoice. And under Options, I have the Create Invoice per job or per job task. And this is the normal job create sales invoice batch job, which you can also find with the search. The difference here is that I've chosen this one, job task. Be aware that if I do not set a filter here on job number, then this batch job will create invoices per job task for all my jobs. And it's one of those things that you don't want to do too often if you need to then delete all of these sales invoices again if it was a mistake. Like any other filtering field, you can of course set an interval and use your normal filtering options. Here we're looking at one specific job, but then creating multiple invoices per job task number. For example, if the customer needs this for internal handling of our invoice. I will leave the filter on job task number blank and also the date filter. So in this case, there were 6 invoices created, all on the same job number, but based on the job task number, which is at the second level of our job hierarchy. I'll click OK and go to Sales Invoices and Credit Memos. As you can see here, there are 6 invoices. All of them are in draft mode as they are not called posted invoices. And we can open them if we need to check something or do some final corrections or add a specific note to each invoice. And there, in one go, we created 6 invoices based on the job task numbers. That's easy, right? It's always nice to work smart, so let me show you a trick if you want to create some usage based on your job planning lines. Here I've opened the job card and then clicked on job planning lines, so I see the job planning lines for this specific job. If there are any of these fields you do not have when you open the page, you just need to add them in a personalization. In this case, I have 3 bicycles, and they are of the type both budget and billable. And it's important here to consider if you're using usage link or not. So normally this will be the quantity minus what has already been posted if you're using the usage link. But here I just want to show how you can send the lines into the journal. So I'll just add it here. And then mark the 3. Click Process and create job journal lines. I need to consider my posting date, the job journal template, and the job journal badge. And then the job planning lines were successfully transferred to a job journal line. And then I can jump to the job journal and say Open Job Journal. Make sure you know if you need to consider the line type here, but that depends on how you're handling your job. In this case, I will just post the journal. And let's then have a look at the job ledger entries. We can just click here on the actual total cost. And we can see the 3 lines of the type usage have been posted to this job. And as I said, this is just a simple example. There can be a lot of variation depending on whether you're using usage link. So make sure that you're creating all the data which is necessary in your case. So I often find that this 3rd level of the job hierarchy is what most people have trouble understanding. It's not hard to understand when you see the model here and the division into job planning lines and job ledger entries. But the actual work with the entries in the system can be a bit confusing when you start using this module. It's very important to understand the difference between planning lines and job ledger entries and what they're used for. A good way to see this is that the level gives us details on how far we are on the project by defining the expected and tracking the actuals. And that's why we need both planning lines and job ledger entries. As I mentioned, the job planning lines show the expected. For each job task, the planning lines describe the expected consumption of items, of resources, and other costs. For example, which resources should do what work, which items do we need, and the different types of planning lines can help us define whether the planned consumption should be invoiced or not. On the other hand, the job ledger entries shows the actuals, so what we have actually realized on this job. They can be divided into sales entries and usage entries posted to this job. If we look at this from another perspective, we have the project in the middle. On the left side of my model, we have time registration, purchase invoices, and so on. So that's our consumption. On the right side, I have sales invoices. So that's what we're actually selling to the customer and invoicing to the customer. The planning lines can be budget or billable. If we have the type budget, it's to track what we expect on the consumption side. If we have the type billable, this is what will be billed on the sales invoice to the customer. We can also have the combination of the two, where the budget and the billable are equal. For example, if we're billing time and material. The job ledger entries can be of type usage or sale. The usage is our consumption, and the sale are what has actually been invoiced to the customer. Depending on whether we're using the usage link functionality, the direct link between planning lines and job ledger entries is more or less clear. There's another video on that. As I mentioned, the planning lines can be of type budget or billable, or both budget and billable. And the difference between these is very important to understand. Sometimes I have customers who don't understand why they're not able to create a sales invoice. And then when I look, it's because they've only created budget planning lines. Because as the name say, budget planning lines are used for the expected usage on a job, so our costs. The billable version shows us the expected sales, and these are the lines which are invoiced. It's good to have the division of budget and billable into separate types if we're, for example, invoicing a fixed price to the customer. But if we're invoicing time and material, we can use the both budget and billable. This way, expected usage and the sales are equal to one another. I would recommend that you watch the video regarding usage link, where we decide if there should be a traceable link between job planning lines and job ledger entries. For each type of job planning line, we can plan on resources, items, or directly on a GL account level. Each job task line, the second level, can have multiple related job planning lines. The same goes for job ledger entries, of course. So there can be several job ledger entries related to each job task. And they will increase over time as we post with job journals or invoices. The job ledger entries have two types. The sale is the actual sales related to this job, so what we have invoiced. And the usage is the usage of items, resources, and costs. So let's just have a quick look in the system. I will go to the list of jobs. And I will open one of the projects. So the job card is my level 1. The tasks here are level 2. And in the sums here, I see the numbers from my planning lines and job ledger entries. I can see that I have budget total cost and actual total cost. So if we compare my budget of 7,460 is based on a range of planning lines. They're planned on different resources, summing to the amount I saw. The actual cost is based on job ledger entries of the type usage. So far, there's been no billing on this job. And I can also see that if I go to job ledger entries to get the full list across job task numbers, there's only the type usage. If I had made a sales invoice from this job, we would in this list be able to see the type sale. This division into budgets and actuals is what we can use to follow up on the progress of this job. And if I go back to my model, we can see that I can compare billable to sale to see how far we are with the invoicing. And I can compare my budget to the usage to see how the forecasts actually match the reality. And the fact that we can calculate work in progress, which gives us the value proposition for using jobs, as you cannot do this in other parts of the system. If I want to see the list of jobs in the system, I need to go to the jobs list. Since I'm a project manager, I can also see the list of my jobs here, but now I want to see the full list. So I'll write jobs. And here I have the full list of all jobs created in the system. And to the right, I have my fact box with details on each job as I go through the list. So the list of jobs is at the top level of my jobs hierarchy. If you want to handle your jobs with currencies other than your local currency, that's possible. Here we will look at invoicing currency. I will create a new job, let the system give the next available number, and enter description. Maybe our bike company here is helping to develop a new brake for a bicycle for an American customer. And I will choose the customer. In this case, I will choose an American customer. And of course, later, I might be interested in creating a lot of job task numbers to structure the project. But for now, I'll just create one. And I'll just call it project. And I'm checking that it's the type posting. because we need one of those in order to post transactions to this job. When we're talking about currency codes on jobs, the foreign trade tab is where you want to go. In this case, we're focused on invoicing currency code, and it has already been inherited from the customer card. All invoices created for this job will be handled in US dollars. And that makes sense if we want to invoice a US customer in US dollars. You can see another video on these exchange rate calculations and whether you want fixed foreign currency or fixed local currency. Often when you invoice in the customer's currency, you want the fixed foreign currency. So if we agreed we would invoice $1,000, they will still be invoiced $1,000 if we change planning line dates and so on. In some cases, I see companies who want to invoice only part of a job based on the job task number. And this might be relevant if you're using the job task to give the phases of your project and you want to invoice each phase separately. So here I've opened a job card and you can see we have a project start job task and some workshop and training. You can see there's billable lines on both of these. But if I only want to invoice the project start, I can mark that line, say documents, and create sales invoice. This is the same prompt as will open when you're invoicing the whole invoice. The difference is that the system will apply the filters for you. So here you can see that it's job number S30 and job task number 1000. So we expect 21,150 to be added to this invoice, assuming we're not using date filters and other things. The invoice price field here will not change yet as the invoice is still in draft mode. But let's go and have a look at the invoice. If I want to open invoice just for this job task number, I can go to Line, Documents, and Sales Invoices and Credit Memos. Then there will be a filter only for this job task number. This is the invoice we just created. I will open it. And as you can see, there's 21,150. Now I can go to posting and my normal sales process for handling sales invoices. Just for fun, let us try to post this one. I will say no to opening the actual posted invoice. You can see it changed status here to posted invoice, and we have the invoiced amount, etc. And now we have a value in the billable invoice price, because we have created job ledger entries of the type sale based on that invoice. If I want to manually convert my usage entries from my job ledger entries list to planning lines, there's a function to help me with that. So here I've opened the job ledger entries on a specific job card. We can see there are 3. And the case here is that I have a need to convert these into planning lines. I can then mark them, say process, and transfer to planning lines. And then the system will create planning lines based on these job ledger entries. This could be that you forgot to define which lines should be created as planning lines when you entered the job journal. Luckily, this function can fix it. So I will choose that these 3 should be transferred to planning lines. And then again, I need to think of the job hierarchy and the different types of job planning lines. I can transfer to budget, so that's what I expect. I can transfer to billable if I want to bill the usage directly. Or I can choose the combination where budget and billable are combined. So let's say this was time and material, and I want my planning lines to be both budget and billable. And I will choose that one and click OK. And the system tells me that the entries were successfully transferred to planning lines. Be aware that there can be some differences depending on whether you're using usage link on your entries or not. If I want to see more details on the job, I need to open the job card. So I'll go to Jobs, and here I have my jobs list. I can click on one of them. As you can see, I have more details here in my fact box than I did on the list. And I'm able to set up the whole job. The number, of course, is the ID for this job and needs to be unique. And I can see the customer and contact and so on. What I can also see here, which was not visible in the jobs list, is the second level of the hierarchy. That's the job tasks. And of course, I'm able to see the postings, duration settings, foreign trade, and work in process. But there's separate videos for each of these tabs. So the job count itself is level 1 in my model. But we also have the line showing the second level, the job task, which you can see as the phases of a project. And you need at least one job task of the type posting to be able to actually post anything to your job. Let's have a look at how you can handle jobs in a currency other than your local currency. I have an open job card here, and under the tab Foreign Trade, we have 4 fields. We have the currency code and the invoice currency code, and both of these will be blank if we're using our local currency. The currency code field will by default be blank on your job. If you enter foreign currency code here, the whole job with planning and invoicing will be handled in that currency. Be aware that you cannot change this currency code after you've started posting entries to the job. The invoice currency code here is set to US dollars, and that comes from the setup on the customer because it's a US customer. So in this setup, we will handle the job itself in our local currency, but the customer will be invoiced in US dollars from this job. And that's quite a normal setup, so we make sure the customers are invoiced in the correct currency. To the right, we have 2 fields regarding exchange rate calculation, both for cost and for price. In both fields, we have the option fixed FCY and fixed LCY. F is for foreign and L is for local, so fixed foreign currency and fixed local currency. These fields are really good to have because they determine how we handle changes in exchange rates. The exchange calculation for cost specifies how job costs are calculated. This will happen if you change the currency date or the currency code fields on a job planning line, or if you run the change job planning line date batch job. If you here choose the fixed LCY option, the job costs in the local currency will be fixed. So any change in the exchange rate will change the value of job costs in the foreign currency. On the other hand, if you choose fixed FCY, the job costs in foreign currency will be kept fixed, and any change in the currency exchange rate will change the value of job costs in the local currency. And the same goes for the price. This specifies how job sales prices are calculated if you change the currency date or the currency code fields on the planning line, and again if you run the change job planning line dates batch job. And this can affect the invoice you send to your customer, of course. So if you have agreed on a price of $1,000, you would want to keep your setup as fixed FCY, because then the amount of $1,000 will be kept unchanged, and any change of the exchange rate will change the value of job prices in the local currency. If you, on the other hand, want to keep the local currency fixed, then choose fixed LCY option. Then the job price in the local currency will be fixed, and any change in currency exchange rate will change the value of job prices in the foreign currency. I have a short overview of this. The fixed local currency option means that if the exchange rate changes, the amount LCY field will stay constant, but the amount field will change in accordance with the exchange rate. If you choose the fixed foreign currency option, the amount LCY field will change in accordance with the exchange rate, but the amount stays constant. Like the example I told about, where we set the exchange rate for price to be fixed foreign currency to make sure that the agreed amount is constant. So for example, the $1,000 we have agreed with the customer is also what we will be invoicing. Let's have a look at how you can create a job with a specific currency code other than your local currency. I will click on New and have the system take the next available number. I need a description, and maybe we've helped with training of some employees. I will then choose the customer number. And I'll choose one from my local currency country. In this example, I will only create one job task number. Now I have one job task number of the type posting, so I'm able to post entries to this job. And let's say that the future bike shop here are owned by an American corporation and we want to handle the whole job in US dollars. Then we need to enter a value in the currency code field. By default, this field will be empty, even though you choose an invoicing currency code. If you enter a foreign currency code, the whole job will be planned and invoiced in that currency. And of course, based on the exchange rate, it will be calculated to fit our local currency for GL entries and so on. I will define the currency code as US dollars. And make sure you consider whether the exchange rate calculation for cost and price should be fixed foreign currency or fixed local currency, so you can control whether the amount or the amount in local currency stays constant. For now, I will use the standard, which is fixed foreign currency. If I want to invoice more effectively across all my jobs or across a range of jobs, I can use a batch job. It's available from the jobs list under Process and Create Job Sales Invoice, or I can use the search from anywhere in the system and choose Job Create Sales Invoice. No matter if I open it from the jobs list or with the search, it will open this prompt. So here I need to consider the posting date. I can say that I want to create an invoice per job or per job task. And then I can do my filtering. So if I leave these blank, all jobs and all job tasks across all dates will be included in the created sales invoices. I could set a filter on job numbers if I have a specific range that I want to invoice. And if I'm using the same job task structure on all my jobs, I could even set a filter on job task number. So for example, if we have the same job task number on all our jobs, maybe if we're using a template to create jobs, then I could say that I want to only invoice the specific job task, but across all my jobs at the same time. For example, if we have one for expenses, I will click OK. And as you can see, 5 invoices have been created across all my jobs. I will say OK. And we can go to sales invoices and see that there are 5 different ones created across job numbers and customer numbers. And of course, I can open each one of them and see what will be invoiced. I can of course make changes directly here, but make sure that you have control over your data on the job and on the invoice. I can of course add extra lines here if there's something that's not registered on the job, but it's usually better to handle everything on the job so you have the full overview on the job card. If I need to see more information on the job that I can see from the jobs list, I can click on one of the jobs and then I open the job card. As you can see, it's many of the same fields as I had in the jobs list, but there are more here and it's easier to overview as they only consider this job. I have more details in my pane over here, my fact boxes, showing only information regarding this job that I'm on. So let's go through the fields. A job needs a number. That's the ID for the job, and that needs to be unique. And usually it's handled with a number series. You can also give the job a description, and then you need to choose the bill to customer number. And when you choose the customer number, the fields for name and address and so on will automatically be filled out. Be aware that if you change the address on the customer, then it will not automatically be updated here on the jobs. The same goes for changes you make here. So if I write street, then it will not be inherited back to the customer. I can also define a contact and be aware that the name of the contact person will be listed over here based on what you choose here as the contact. So this is Mariah and her name is listed over here. I can also enter a search description. If I have something else to remember this job by, I can define a person responsible, and that's based on the resources list. I have options to block the job for posting or for all. I can see when it was last modified, and the project manager setup looks down into the user setup list. And since I've been added as the project manager here, I can see this job in my list of jobs on my role center. Next here considers tasks, so job tasks, but I will skip that for now. There's another video regarding job tasks and how to create those. So the next tab is posting, and we have a status field. There's 4 different statuses, and as the name say, they define the status the job is in. For example, you cannot post anything to a job which is marked as completed. By default, when you create a new job, it will always have the status order. With this status, you can already start posting on the job, but if you would like to prevent this, you can use the blocked field. So you can either block for posting with completed if the job is actually completed, or you can use the blocked field that we saw in the general tab. Or you can choose the status planning. An example for a planning status of the job is that we are at a point where we still need to create a quote for the customer, or I'm looking at what resources we need, what items do we need, and so on. But you can easily switch between the statuses just by changing this field. And you can also change status back from completed if something else comes in that you need to post to the job after you've completed it. We also need to define the posting group so the system knows how to post entries to the job. Here I've just chosen the one called standard, which was inherited by the job setup, but if I can change it specifically on this job if it needs to be something else. The same goes for the VIP method, VIP posting method, and allow budget and billable lines, and apply usage link. Those will be inherited from the job setup, but I can change them here if I need something specific for this job. In the Durations tab, I can set a starting date and an end date for the project. And these are just for information to the user. And there's no functionality tied up on these. I can also see the creation date, so when was this job created. In the Foreign Trade tab, I can define a currency code for the whole job to be handled in. Or I can define just a currency code for invoicing, if the customer needs this invoice to be in a specific currency. I also have the option to define specific exchange rate calculation setup for cost and price calculations. So in the work in process and recognition tab, we have some calculated fields. You can see that they are grayed out, so it's not something I can enter data into. But as we start calculating work in process, these will be updated, and I will be able to click here and see how the amount was calculated. Yes, and that was the job card. In the jobs module, we're quite concerned about the status of the project. And the status field is placed here in the Postings tab. Yes, the name states the status field shows the progress of your job. And it can be 4 different values. Planning, quote, open, and completed. By default, your new job will have the status open. And this means it's ready for posting. If you want to prevent any postings to the job, you can use the blocked field up here in the General tab to make sure no entries are posted before the job is ready for it. But you could also select the planning status. So an example of using the planning status would be that we are at a point where we still need to create a quote for the customer. And I might be looking for which resources or items we need and so on. The quote status is of course to define that we have a quote out to the customer, but we're waiting for them to get back. The main ones to consider are still if the job is open or completed. That's what most people use. And the completed status is important. This means we're closing the job, and it will also give you a prompt on calculation of work in process and so on. You can see the video on how to close a job. One important thing about the completed status is that you can change it back. So if you completed the job but you find out that was not the case, you can reopen. Let's say I want to append some lines to an existing invoice on a customer. Maybe they were outside my filter on the original job invoice, or I have created a manual invoice for something we're selling them outside of the jobs, and I want to have those linked together. Then I can go into the job and into the job planning lines. So here I've opened a specific job and then clicked on the planning lines. And instead of having to delete the other invoice and create a fully new one, I will just append these 2 lines. So I have 2 lines here with an invoice quantity. I'll click on Process and create Sales Invoice. I can say Append to Sales Invoice Number. And here I can see that an invoice already exists for this customer. I can also open the card and see that it's an item. So apparently we're selling 10 bikes to them, which was maybe not handled in the Jobs module. I'll say yes to exiting. And I will say OK, since this is the one I want to append to. The system will then say that we're not creating a new invoice. And it will leave the posting date blank, as we're inheriting the posting date from the one we append to. I'll say OK. And my 2 lines were successfully transferred to the invoice. Let's just have a look at that. I can go to my sales invoices and credit memos list. And I can see that we have the original 10 bikes and then my 2 resource lines.
Hi, and thanks for watching. This video introduces project managers to jobs in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. We'll look at 2 different ways to create jobs, including budgets, to increase visibility into costs, predict cost overruns, and maximize revenue. From the Project Manager Role Center, we'll use the navigation list to see our list of jobs. The list shows 2 sample jobs, but we'll create a new one. On the job card, Business Central assigns the job number, and we'll enter basic information like a description and the customer. We'll assign ourselves as the project manager, so our role center will display the job. Now we'll create tasks. Typically, the job task number is part of a number sequence that we define. We'll keep it simple and use 100, 200, and so on. The description lets us add information about the task. We can have 1 or 2 tasks, such as consulting or design services, or a list of many tasks. We'll leave the job task type set to posting, so we can add budget information on a planning line. To add budget information, we'll open the Job Planning Lines window. We enter the job task number or use the lookup. The line type can be budget or billable or both, depending on the line cost and how we bill the customer. We can also set the planning date and document number. Next, we'll add items and our resources, which are the people who will do the work, and the quantity. The cost and price amounts come from the resource or item assigned. We can add as many lines as we need. Back on the job card, tasks show the totals for costs and invoicing in the Job Details pane, which helps us stay on budget. The Posting Fast tab is also important. We should choose a Job Posting Group and a WIP method. We can assign job posting groups per job, or, in the Job Setup window, we can specify a job posting group that Business Central will assign to new jobs. The jobs list on the Project Manager Role Center now shows our job. When we set up other jobs like the one we just created, we can save time by copying its tasks. Let's do that. On the Project Manager Role Center, we'll choose New Job to start the Create New Job Assisted Setup Guide. Business Central assigns a job number, so we just need to enter a description and customer number. We select the job to copy from, specify tasks, or leave them blank to copy all tasks. If we want, on the Apply Fast tab, we can copy quantities and dimensions. We can now see our new job. Notice that the job has tasks and that some are bold. This is a way to group tasks and create subtasks. The Begin Total and End Total job task types work with the Indent Job Tasks option on the line to indent subtasks and groups, so they're easier to see. Notice those lines don't show budget information. Thanks again for watching this video about how to create a job in Business Central. which helps project managers understand their cost structure, predict when they're at risk of going over budget, and maximize revenue from their work.
In order to post entries to a job, you need at least one job task. From the jobs list, I will open a job where I need to enter a job task. Under tasks, we have the list of job tasks. You need to enter a number and a description. We need at least one job task with the type posting in order to post entries to the job. The other types are used if we have a more complex job task structure. Now I have created a job task and I can start posting entries to this job.
So if I want to close my job, I need to consider if I actually want to close it or if I just want to block it for a period. I can block it for posting or for all, and then I can open it again. But if the project is truly done, then I can change the status on the posting to completed. Since I have work in process set, the system will check and see if everything is handled there. If I choose completed, you can see it will update the end date, and then it will tell me that I need to calculate work in process to create the completion entries for this job. I will not do this now as this is not the focus. There's other videos on how to calculate work in process. So I will just click no and cancel. And if I did not have a work in process method here, I would not get that information box. One thing I need to remember to say as well is that if you change this to completed, but somehow the project wasn't finished as you expected it to be, then you can reopen. And the system will then again make sure that we have handled all the work in process correct. So now it's reopened. If you're responsible for many jobs, or if you're sitting in finance and want to do some controlling before you start invoicing, I'll show you a report that's good to know. Under reports from my job list, I will choose suggested billing. I have options to change which currency I see, the local currency or the foreign currency. I can filter on a range of jobs or a specific job or a specific customer. And I can filter on dates. I can send the report to different file types, so PDF or Excel. I can print it, or I can use the preview, as I will do now. So the list here is divided per job and customer, of course, because one job can only refer to one customer. You can see the job name here. Then you can see the job tasks, which will be invoiced down here. And then at the bottom, we have a sum per customer. So for example, customer 30,000, Future Bikes Düsseldorf, we have 2 jobs for those. And their sum here is the sum of both.
In order to save time on creating job tasks, it might be relevant to use the copy function. From the jobs list, I will open the job where I wish to work. As you can see, there are no job tasks on this job yet. I will open the copy function and choose Copy Job Tasks From. There's also a function to copy job tasks from the current job to another job. I will choose the job number to copy from. And I can define the range of job task numbers I wish to copy. If I leave these 2 fields blank, the system will copy all job tasks. In the field source, we can choose the basis on which we wish to create our planning lines. The standard source is set to planning lines. But we can also choose to create our job planning lines based on job ledger entries on the job we copy from. This way, the planning lines will reflect actual usage and actual invoicing on the job we copy from. We can also choose none. If I choose planning line, then I can choose which types of planning line we wish to copy. If I choose budget and billable, all planning lines will be copied. If I choose budget, only lines of the type budget or type both budget and billable will be copied. And similar, if I choose billable, only lines of type billable or type both budget and billable will be copied. If I instead use the source job ledger entries, the include planning line will be grayed out, and instead I can use the include ledger entry line type. If I choose usage and sale, all job ledger entries are copied. Those of type usage will be copied to new planning lines of type budget. Entries of type sale are copied as billable. We can also do this separately, so I can choose only to copy usage or only to copy sale. I can also set a date filter. The system has automatically chosen the job number where I was copying to. Under Apply, I can choose if I wish to copy quantities and dimensions to my job. I will click OK. So the job tasks from the other job were successfully copied. So now I have my job tasks, and they are structured exactly as they were on the job I copied from.
If I want to see the invoices and credit memos linked to each job, I can do it from my jobs list. So I will mark the job, go to Navigate, and click on Sales Invoices and Credit Memos. Here we can see that there are 4 invoices on this job. 3 which are in draft mode as they are not posted yet, and 1 which is a posted invoice. If there were credit memos linked to this job, they would be represented in the same list. You can see that the posted invoice has an invoiced amount in local currency and a cost amount, and those are not represented on the draft invoices yet because it has not been posted. If I want to open and see the invoice, I can mark the line and click on Open Sales Invoice or Credit Memo. This will open the draft invoice or the posted invoice, just like any other sales invoice or credit memo.
If you're using dimensions, it might be relevant to add these to a job. We can add dimensions for the whole job. And as you can see, we already have a dimension. This dimension has been inherited from the customer card. We could add the department and choose a dimension value. We can also set up value posting and, for example, set this code as mandatory. The system will ask us if we wish to update all the existing lines on the job with this new dimension setup. I will choose yes. We can also add dimensions on the specific lines. Go to Line, Dimensions. We can see that the department dimension has been added to this line. I can then add specific extra dimension codes to this line. For example, area. When I add it on the line, it will not be set up for the whole job, only for this line.
If I want to see the invoices and credit memos for a specific job task, if I have a job with a lot of entries on it, I can open the job card as I've done here, and then I will go down to the tasks section. I'll click on Line and Documents and choose Sales Invoices and Credit Memos. As you can see here, there's a draft invoice with the status invoice and a posted invoice. And of course, if there were credit memos, they would be listed here as well. And I can open them and see the standard sales draft invoice and the standard posted sales invoice. And since the line I marked was job task 1000, these will have entries posted to that job task number. And depending on how you created the invoice, maybe other job tasks as well. On the job, we have the option to set up some job-specific prices. So we might use this if we're not using customer price groups, but only want to set a price for this specific project for the customer. As you can see, there are 3 different ways to set up prices for GL accounts, resources, and items. In this video, we will look at the items. There are different ways to define prices, or different approaches. I can define prices down to job task, or I can define a price that is valid for the whole job if I leave the job task number blank. And that's the general rule across all of these fields. If I leave the value blank, it will mean that it covers all types. So blank job task number means that it's valid for all of these job task numbers. If I want to set up a specific item price on a specific item, I will choose it on the list. I can, for example, choose this street sport bike with a normal unit price of 5,999. I can also define specific setups for the unit of measure. If the price is only valid for a specific currency code, I will leave the currency code blank as I'm using local currency. I could define a unit price for this bike for 5,000 on this project. And I might want to create a new price for a street touring bike. Here I might not want to give them a specific unit price on the job, but maybe an agreed discount. I can also set up a unit cost factor if you want the customer to pay by a factor on the cost. So we could do that on 1011 and say that they should pay cost 20%. And since it's a factor, it will be multiplied to the amount. So I'll write it as 1.20. On the job, we have the option to set up some specific prices which will only be valid for this job. As you can see, we can set up prices for GL account, resource, and item. In this video, we will look at how to set up resource prices. I will just expand it. One important thing to understand regarding prices is that a blank code, for example in job task number, means that the price will cover all job task numbers. So here on job S00050, and job task number blank, I can set up a resource price for a specific resource. Let's look at Daniel and see what his normal price is. So the normal unit cost for Daniel would be 404.25. We'll just enter him here. And you can, of course, use the lookup as we saw before. I can set up a unit price, for example, a higher one, which will then be valid on this job. So if Daniel works on job S50, he will have a unit price of 500 instead of his normal price set up on the resource. I can even define different unit prices depending on the work type. So if Daniel, for example, should have a higher price in the weekend, then the unit price of 500 would only be valid if he has the work type code weekend. And again, if I leave it blank, it will be both weekend and weekdays. But let's make one for weekends. And we can make one for weekdays. which might be a bit cheaper. I can also set up a unit cost factor. So if we choose John, I can say that the customer should pay our cost with a factor on it. So if they would pay for the cost plus 20%, I would write 1.20 because the factor will be multiplied to the unit cost. We can also set up a line discount. For example, if Mike is working. And we want to give a 10% discount on Mike's hours. Maybe he's a new employee and the customer asked if they could get a discount if they agreed that he's working on this project. This line discount will also be shown on the sales invoice in the line discount column. And there, now we've set up different resource prices. On the job, we have the option to set up some specific prices that we want to invoice to the customer. As you can see, we have different types. So GL account, resource, and item. In this video, we will look at the GL account. So this is my setup table. And I'm setting up specific prices for this job number. I have different options and I can set up a lot of different prices. It's just a matter of how many lines I add here. One important thing to understand is that if, for example, I leave the job task number blank, it means that my price will be valid for all job task numbers. The GL prices are often used if you want to specify expenses for travel or accommodations, or maybe food, which we would like to invoice to the job customer. I will add a specific job task number in this case for transport. I will find the relevant GL account. And I can define a currency code for the price. I will leave it blank as I'm using local currency. Normally, you might be interested in adding a unit cost factor. So for example, adding 30% to your cost factor. So for transport, I've added a unit cost factor of 1.30. So 30% will be multiplied on the cost. I could also add a job task number with a line discount. For example, if there are any costs on material and equipment. And then I can choose an account. For example, marketing costs. And I can give them a discount, 10%. Now I've defined that on job task 5000, if anything is posted with GL account 25100, we will add a unit cost factor. And on job task 3000, and if the account is 32015, we will give a line discount of 10%, which will be shown on the customer's invoice. Well, let's have a look at job journals. And remember the difference. Job journals and job GL journals are not the same. The difference is the job journal will not create GL entries when you post it. So let's have a look at the job journal, no GL. I will choose job journal templates. And as you can see, there are two lines here. So two different templates. There's a template for a normal job journal and for a recurring job journal. We will look at that in another video. So here we have a name and a description, and we can define a number series, which will be inherited to the job journal batches. And this is like any other journal setup. Since it's not a recurring journal, we will not set a check mark here. And you can see that source code is set to job journal, which is also correct. There's no recent code, but that's fine. And I'm not choosing to increment the batch name. So for example, if I wrote a name called job 1, it would increment every time I post. So job 1, 2, 3, and so on. But we're not using that. Let's have a look at the job journal batches. So These are the actual job journals we're working in. And as you can see, there's two different ones, one called default and one called standard. I can just add the missing description. As you can see, the number series setup has been inherited from the job journal template, but we're able to change it for the specific job journal if we want different number series, or if we want to be using posting number series instead. But often it's fine to use the same number series, as long as we're not different employees posting in different journals at the same time. If this list is blank when you open it, you can of course create a new line, just give it a name, and you're ready to start working in the journal. Let's have a look at recurring job journals and how to set those up. Remember that recurring job journals are still job journals, which is not the same as a job GL journal. The difference is that when you post a recurring job journal, there will not be created any general ledger entries. For that, you would need a job GL journal. Let's have a look. I'll go to job journal templates. And as you can see, we already have a job journal template for recurring journals. The setup here will be inherited to the job journal batches. The difference between the recurring journal and the standard job journal is this little check mark stating that it's a recurring journal. And of course, we need to set this check mark if we want a recurring journal. So if there's no job journal template with this check mark and you need a recurring job journal, you need to create a new line here and make sure to set this check mark. The rest is standard journal setup, number series and source codes, reason codes, and if you want to increment the batch name. We'll not do that now. I will navigate to the template batches. As you can see here, there are two different journal batches, and you can see up here that they are recurring. In this case, there's a recurring job journal for 2 employees. So we're using specific batches for each employee. And that's what I see most people do if they have employees registering their time and we need to invoice that from the job. As you can see, both of these journals have inherited the setting from the job journal template. Posting number series is the same, but as in all journals, we can define different number series for the specific batch if we want to. I can create, of course, new batches, and if your list is blank, you will need to create one. Or we can just open one of the existing ones and start working. And of course, you need to define the recurring method, if it's fixed or variable. I'll say fixed. And often for recurring job journals, it will be 1 month, but it could be 1 week or whatever suits in your company. And now we're ready to enter the usage lines. In this video, we will look at job GL journals. And remember the difference. There's job journals and recurring job journals, and then there's job GL journals. And the job GL journals means that when you post the journal, entries will be posted to the job, but they will also create GL entries. So that's an important distinction. Make sure you choose the right journal. Since it's a job GL journal, I will need to search for general journals. Since we're looking at the setup, I will choose the general journal templates. And as you can see, one of them is called jobs. So this is the template for the job GL journals. If this doesn't exist and you need to create a new one, make sure you choose the type jobs here. I will just expand. Since we're just setting up a job GL journal, I will not set the checkmark in recurring. I can set up balance account type and balance account number, just like any other GL journal. I can set up the number series or the posting number series, and the source code, reason code, and so on. And these will be inherited to the general journal batches that I create. I can also set the standard check marks if they are relevant, but I'm happy with the standard setup here. So let's go and see the batches. I'll click Navigate, Template, and see the batches, and expand this one. As you can see, there's one job GL journal called default. It has inherited the setup from the GL journal setup. So the number series and all of that. But of course you can create as many journals as you want. And you can vary the setup for number series and balance accounts and so on if that's relevant. If this list is blank, of course you can create new lines. But I will just open the default one under Process and Edit Journal. And now I can start working in my Job GL journal and enter the relevant data before I can post it to the job.